Okay, welcome back. We're talking about comments now. You really need to pay attention to this because this is something I'm going to ask you to do in every single one of your assignments. Okay? Every single one. What I want you to do is someplace up towards the top. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the very, very top, but somewhere at indentation 0. Okay? I'm gonna whack this part because that's where I'm gonna put my stuff. I want to set a standard comments. Okay, now you don't necessarily have to do it exactly the way I did it, but basically it's got to contain three pieces of information. What your name is. So name is, John Doe. What the assignment is, assignment number 2 or 4, whatever, and then the date that you did this, which whatever, it's going to be 9 or 8/28/2020. Okay, so I want these 3 pieces somewhere at indentation 0. It could be at the very top, could be after the package thing, which we haven't even talked about yet. But I want these 3 pieces of information at the top of every single application you submit. Got it? You know what's going to happen if you don't do this, right? You're going to get points off. Right, okay. So let's talk about the rules for creating comments. I want to create comments for several reasons. First of all, the comments are documentation to me and other programmers. So it's perfectly okay to use acronyms and jargon because we're not talking about the average user looking at this, right? We're talking about other programming professionals looking at it. So it's okay, okay? It's perfectly all right. So I'm going to get rid of some of this built-in stuff and put in some comments in here. So like this one, I'm going to put a comment in that says, this is the sales tax rate for state and county where I'm living. Okay, cool. So that's a good comment. Now, I do not comment every single line because that's dumb. I wouldn't say this outputs hello world. Well, I can already see that, all right? So what I need to know is the reason why you put a comment is to describe something that's complex, okay? Like, for example, here, when I did this, I might want to comment this, hey, look, the cast will truncate, that's a good word, this to 0. That's kind of weird, right? So I'm documenting something that's strange and unusual. And here I'm going to say something like both variables are promoted. Well, not both. Variables are promoted before math. Okay, things like that kind of makes sense. So the rules. First of all, the first rule is you are the target audience, so it's okay to use jargon. Describe complex things that are kind of confusing. And then maybe document why you chose to do something one way versus another. Because I may be looking over this going, why on earth did you do that? I bet we could do this better doing such and such. And then there was a reason for that. And so I go off on a wild tangent only to describe it, only to discover later that, okay, you were right. But you didn't leave me any breadcrumbs behind, so I didn't know that. And then the last rule is kind of an anti-rule, and that is don't comment everything. That's just dumb. Okay, so on page 83, they talk about programming style. So, spaces, indentation, blank lines, punctuation, a lot of this stuff is for the human. All right, so we have adopted a style because that's what the book uses, and coincidentally, that's what I use, and that is I start all classes and all methods with the curly brace on the as far left as the curly brace can go. I don't stagger it where the opening curly brace is at this side, and then the closing curly brace is way down over here. I kind of like that the curly braces line up. That way I can't possibly screw up, right? That's a good thing. So if I write something and then I go, oops, I wasn't really following my style guide, then yes, you can do this. There's a way you can go in to correct changes. Now, I don't think we have any changes in here, but let's just say that we did. So I'm going to do Control A. That Control A means everything. And I kind of showed you guys this before if you go to Source and Format. But since this is something I do a lot, Alt-Shift-F. So I'm going to do Alt-Shift-F. Okay, and all it did was put a space there. I think that's the only thing it did. Yeah. Okay, so the style guide is really just for humans, right? Because the machine really doesn't care if there was a space between the word int and tax rate. It doesn't care, but you know, it's trying to make it so that if everyone was using the same style in your company and you try to borrow some of their code, it would make it a heck of a lot easier. If everyone was free to do their own thing, then whatever you borrowed code from me, you'd be going, oh my God, what the heck is that? Right? So that's the whole point. Okay, so reading keyboard input on page 85. Now you really got to be paying attention because I'm going to deviate from the book. So pay attention. Okay, so when you're trying to get information from the user in a console application, I need to be able to read from the keyboard. Okay, and there's a thing called a scanner. All right, that's a pretty good name because it kind of scans the keyboard. I go along with that. Cool. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to create me a scanner. And so a capital S, that ought to tell you everything you need to know. If it starts with a capital letter, it's going to be a class. Scanner, and then I'm going to call this thing keyboard because that's just kind of a cool name, right? Equals new scanner, and then I'm going to say system.in. Okay, now there's an awful lot of stuff here to digest. Okay, so let me just go through it one thing at a time. All right. First of all, it's got this. I got a yellow balloon with a red dot saying there's something wrong. It says I can't find this thing. Now, if I click on this, it's going to give me some suggestions. And the first suggestion is I'm going to import something. Now, the way it works is instead of cluttering the language with tons and tons of stuff, remember there's only like 53 keywords, right? Whenever you're trying to use something different, instead of having all this stuff in your head at the same time, they basically just add things to the application as you need them. In this case, the import. So I'm going to click on this and go back up to the top, and it added this line right here, import Java utility scanner. Okay, so now the squiggly's gone away. Now let's talk about what this means, because a little later on when we start talking about classes, which is only like 3 or 4 chapters away, this is going to make a lot more sense. So you might notice that the word scanner appears twice. The first time it appears, it's being used as if it was a type, you know, like integer, double, or string, right? Because this is no different than saying double jump 2, right? It's scanner keyboard. So scanner is being used as a type. Keyboard is just a variable that we created, just like jump 2. And then the new operator is the thing that tells it to actually run. But I need a recipe to tell it how to build this thing, and that's why this thing appears twice. So scanner is the first used as a type, and then this is called instantiation. How's that for a bizarre word? It's used to create. So one is used as a type, and the other one is used like a recipe, so I know how to build this thing. So scanner keyboard is equal to new, and new is just telling it, okay, it's time for you to do it now. Okay, that's what new means. You know, take the recipe and go ahead and make the chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so that's what that is. That's the oven. That's the do it now thing. Okay? All right, one more time. The first word scanner is when it's used as a type. The keyboard is just a variable that we assign to this instance of a class. The new means I need to create an instance of a class. I mean, do it now. And then the second one is used as a constructor. That's a cool term. Used as a constructor, which basically gives it the recipe on how you want this thing built. And I want it built using something called system in. System in is the default input for an application, which a console application, that's going to be the keyboard. That kind of makes sense? Okay. All right. So how come I got a yellow balloon with a red dot at the very beginning? Well, because the scanner class wasn't known to my application. It didn't know anything about it. So I had to add an import statement up here. Well, actually, the machine added it. I just clicked on it and it said, you know, the very first suggestion was to add that thing. Cool beans. All right. So let's look at some of the scanner methods because there's quite a few of them. So there's one called getting the next byte, getting the next double, the next float, next line, next long, next short. Now, I'm going to tell you, I am not going to do it the way they do it. There's a lot of reasons for it, but let me just explain why I'm not going to do it the way they do it. This is kind of unique in the programming language world to have techniques like this. And so I'm going to teach you a more generic way that's going to make more sense when you take the next programming language. Because if you were to take, you know, C# or Visual Basic or C++ or any of the other languages, I'm going to show you a technique that's going to work for all of those. So I'm not going to use these guys. Okay, good. So on page 89, they talk about how do you read a single character coming in off of a thing. Well, notice there isn't one called next char, okay, which would be kind of what we were after. Actually after a character. But there isn't one. There's one for byte and double and So the way you do it is you get a line, get a string, and then after that, remember one of the objects, I'm sorry, one of the methods was in the list. There's one of them is called character at, char at. And so char at 0 means give me the first character. Kind of weird. Anyway, they do a kind of a demo there on page 88. And so here's one of the other reasons I don't want you to use their technique, and it's described on page 89. It's kind of unique to the Java world. And the way these scanners work is, if I was to type, I don't know, 12, Mary Had a Little Lamb, okay? And I was asking it to read an integer. What it'll do is it'll read up to the 12 and just stop and leave Mary Had a Little Lamb alone. And so then I turn right around and say, what is your name? And the machine's going to say, oh, well, your name is Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like, what? I didn't type that on that line. And so it's just a crazy thing. I'm probably describing it poorly, but if you read that section called Mixing Calls to Next Line on page 89, it'll kind of sort of describe it. It gives an example. And so we're not going to use their technique anyway, so we're not going to have that problem. Okay, good. So what I want you to do is to use next line for everything. All keyboard input is going to be using next line. Okay? And then after which means we're reading it as a string. And afterwards, we can convert it. Okay, so let's start with something where I don't need to convert. I want to prompt you for your name. So I go here and I say, first of all, I should have a prompt, right? Just a text prompt that says something like, you know, system.out.print, not print line, because I want the cursor to stay on the same line. Something like, enter your name. I usually put a colon and a space just to make it look pretty. Okay, and then I would say string, I'm just going to call it, well, let's call it name. Name is equal to keyboard, next line. Okay. Oops, that should be a capital S. Shows you what I know. All right. So now I'm using next line to pull it in as a string. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.